This episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Genuine Fantasy Press. Genuine Fantasy Press is giving away a free version of the new book, The Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening, at genuinefantasypress.com. This is a book for 5th edition D&D. All of the player content is included in the free version. That's 125 friggin' pages. Incredible. It contains 34 new subclasses, 17 new warlock patrons and familiars, and over 175 new spells and invocations, 10 new races, and a dozen campaign hooks. The total package is 190 pages of new content. The book is designed to work with both classic and homebrew settings and gives you new ideas for your world and your game. You can drop it in anywhere. It's got beautiful full-color artwork and is available internationally in hardcover on Amazon. Genuine Fantasy Press. Inspiring adventure. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This is one of my favorite episodes we've ever recorded. It's a little different because it is about a project I worked on. It's called Bryte. It is an original tabletop RPG I designed for Roll20, but I didn't do it alone. I designed it with an amazing team, and that's who I'm talking with today. Jim McClure, Kuhl, and Darcy Ross were all part of this design process. They were partners in crime with me as we developed a science fantasy setting that was totally original and unique for use with the Roll20 virtual tabletop. We get into it and talk about it a lot, but before we get to that conversation, I just want to let you know that right now, as of the day this podcast drops, the playtest of Bryte is available to both Roll20 Pro and Plus subscribers, and every Monday at noon Pacific, you can watch a Bryte actual play on the Roll20 Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Roll20app. Check it out. It's got me, it's got Kat, it's also got CJ and Alex from Roll20, and it's got Pumpkinberry, an amazing streamer. I'm so excited. Please come check us out for our first session today. Okay. I know I say this all the time, but this is for real true. I am here with 3 of my favorite people on this planet.
You are stealing my bit.
That's true. That's true. That is Jim's bit. Only this time it's genuine, Jim.
Well, I don't like the way that implies that my sentence isn't genuine.
It's good.
So let's go around the table and let people know who you are, what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games. We're the Bryte design team. Why don't we start with you, Kat?
Oh, gosh. Hi, everyone. I'm Kuhl. I design games, and I make a bunch of podcasts. I also guess voice act. So right now I help run Precocious LLC, which makes games. And then I do a bunch of podcasts that don't have anything to do with games, like Never Tell Me the Pods, which is a Star Wars discussion podcast, River Do's and River Don'ts, which is a Riverdale rewatch podcast. And I have one games-related podcast, which is upcoming, which is called Autonomic, which is a children's actual play podcast, which is a fantasy Indo-Ecuadorian sort of deal, which I'm very passionate about. I DM that deal, and it has like a high caliber of talent in its players. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's upcoming, starting probably late October.
Wow, that's awesome. I can't wait to check that out. Kat does great podcasts and great game design, and it's awesome to have you here today. Also here is Jim McClure. Jim, welcome back to Tabletop Babble.
Oh, yeah, and I've been here before. You can do the whole introduction. Yes, hello, everyone. I'm here today with my favorite group of people in the world, so I'm all kinds of excited. My name's Jim McClure. I'm an RPG designer and publisher, also podcaster. For podcasts, I do Talking Tabletop over on the One Shot Podcast Network, where everyone on this call has been on the show before, now that I think about it. It's just been a while since I've done Darcy and Kat. Y'all are going to have to come back on Talking Tabletop. We'll have to do how things have changed in 4 years, whatever it's been. And I own the publishing company Third Act Publishing, where we produce small press RPG games. And of course, I was one with the rest of the people on this call, lead designers of Bryte, this wonderful game that we've done for Roll20. And couldn't be more excited after what, like a year of a gag order to finally get to talk about this thing. So I have a lot of energy. So fair warning on that, especially about this project. So I'm still stupid excited to talk about this thing.
Definitely. Yeah, I am. I'm very excited as well. And it's awesome to have you, Jim. You're always blowing my mind whenever you come on this podcast. So I look forward to more of that happening today. And this might be the first time on Tabletop Babble, although, Darcy, we've talked on many other podcasts before. Tell the people who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
Hey folks, unlike Jim McClure, I came with no bits. So my shtick is I'm Darcy Ross. I work as the community relations coordinator, the social talkie person for Monte Cook Games, which is the creator of my favorite role-playing game that really got me deep into the community of role-playing and podcasting, things like that, Numenera. And that's relevant to this because Numenera is full of squeaky creatures and asking what could be. And I come from a biology background where I study squeaky creatures and wonder what they could have been if their genes were different or if evolution took a different course. And it was my absolute delight to get to play with that in the Bryte game and play with some of the world building and this game that we imbued with so many fascinating what ifs and left so much room for what ifs for players. So I think I really enjoyed working with this team, and I'm excited to dig into the world beyond the gag order today.
Yeah, and I think we can dive right in now that the gag order has been lifted and talk about Bryte, right? Bryte is a science fantasy role-playing game that is made for the Roll20 virtual tabletop platform, something that we started working on a year ago. It's got a lot of really fun and interesting features. It's optimized for Roll20, but is still technically playable at a table. And I think we can talk a little bit more about that. But Jim, why don't I start with you? What is Bryte?
Bryte is kind of exactly, James, what you just said. Is this is a game that Roll20 sort of came to us as a design team. I don't know, maybe we'll talk about how all that came together or not. But Roll20 and Nolan, who is I call him Grand High Emperor of Roll20. I forget what non-pretentious title he actually likes. Oh yeah, no, he loves it every time I call him that. Grand High Pope Emperor of Roll20, Nolan came down to us and wanted us to essentially put together a game for him, specifically for the Roll20 platform. And I'm guessing most people listening to this are familiar with Roll20, but if you're not, it's an online virtual tabletop. Essentially, it's where people go online and get together to play wonderful tabletop games. It's a little bit near and dear to my heart because I got on Roll20 a couple months after it went live. And we're talking, was this 6 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever that's been. And kind of the reason I got into podcasting and ultimately RPG publishing, which is now my day job, is because of Roll20 and sort of working through there. So getting to kind of come back around full circle and design a game for them makes my heart flutter, James. It sure does. But essentially the concept of the game is exactly as James said, and just to give you an overview kind of the setting is it's a sci-fi game, but it's definitely sci-fi fantasy. We're talking triangular planets and just crazy nonsense. So think about it like that. But the concept is we have a universe that is shrinking, and it's shrinking in a very fantasy sci-fi way. In there's what we call the burn, which is sort of all around the galaxy that we're in, which kind of looks like the Aurora Borealis, and that's closing inward. And as it closes inward, it sort of burns and destroys everything in its path. So planets, stars, spaceships, whatever there is, it's just destroying it. So we live in this universe where our galaxy has been isolated off. We honestly don't know if there's anything left out there besides our galaxy, but we can't communicate with them regardless. So our galaxy has been isolated off, and the sentient species that are around the galaxy are having to continually move inward because they can see the burn coming. And obviously you're not going to stay on a planet that's going to get destroyed. And now we're at a point where we have a resource scarce universe because there's only so many places you can put all of these people. There's only so many resources to allow these people to continue and live and exist. So what do you do when you have, a species that has been displaced from its planet, but there's nowhere to put them? And these are some of the questions that our game asks and some of the territory that we sort of get to expand upon and the players get to play within and dive into. So that's a 10,000 foot view of kind of what Bryte is.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, we came up with this concept of the shrinking universe, namely because we were talking about how hard it is to create exploratory systems and blank spots and all that, which our game also has. But Kat, I think you really helped make it real and give it importance when you talked about sort of the themes you saw in the game. Could you talk to me a little bit about the themes you see in the story?
Sure. So pretty early on, I was just like, oh, this is about immigration and about refugees. I see a lot of that happening, and also about environmental issues, because boy howdy, if you have a defined space that is shrinking and limited resources, you're going to have people being pushed out of spaces. That has a very real impact on people's behavior. At the time, I was like, I would love to see a sort of solar punky view of that, something that tackles those themes in a hopeful way. Something that is it doesn't look good. It's spooky going forward because the future looks bleak, and all that we have to look forward to is stuff getting worse. But we haven't given up, and we're determined to get along and make this work. So that's kind of what I wanted to see in it, and everyone on the call was like, yeah. And we went for it. Mm-hmm.
And an added benefit, Kat taught me the term solar punk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jim learned something.
I learned today. Yay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kat, you bring this amazing depth of story to everything and just this amazing knowledge of genre that I think is so wonderful to have. And I feel like I learned so much. I still have a list of pop culture things that I need to check out from working with the entire team, really, because you all consume media that I don't. And I was like, oh, I have to check some of this out. Turns out it's all great, you guys. There's a lot of great stuff I've been missing for years. So if nothing else, I get that out of this project, which was incredible. Darcy, when you came on the project, we were still forming the story of Bryte. What do you think of sort of the story and the fact that there are no humans in the game?
I was really delighted by a number of surprises that I think existed from the beginning and then emerged as design continued for the milieu of interweaving stories that are happening as you enter as players in this game. I love the decision to not have humans. There's a lot in games about default and other that can be useful and fun to explore, and I think they're explored a lot in ways that are maybe not critical. And so I like that we made a game that forces everyone to, not forces, but invites everyone to embody this being that's going to be different from them and really lean into that, right? This is a game that challenges you to come be a part of this interesting, strange universe that doesn't give you a default, right? It wants you to step into some shoes and see what that's like. And I think that's really fun. And also it just gives us more digital page space for more weird critters, right? And I am all about more weird critters.
I looked up what people were saying about this system, and I saw one of the few pieces of negative feedback that we got was about someone being like, I don't like that there aren't humans. And they're just like, come on, you're going to lose people because of this. Don't you get that it's not that most people play humans and things, and I hate this, and that people are going to hack in humans anyway. And it was just like, wow, it's really interesting that this is getting to people already, but it's just, that it's like, well, we're not going to do it, you guys. It's part of the point of what we did.
Right. And I think they'll be able to hack it in, and power to them. It's just not part of the it didn't fit with what we were trying to do, I think, fundamentally. So your game may be different from the kinds of games we were designing toward, but that's okay. I hack stuff all the time. Hack away.
Yeah, and to expand on that point, I mean, because we did as a team make a very intentional design decision to remove humans, and both Kat and Darcy just mentioned a little bit about this, and that's kind of, and we see it in the data from D&D and Wizards of the Coast. Like, the default assumption people have is they play humans. Now, obviously that doesn't apply to everyone, but trends, as far as if you look at the entire player base, more people play human than play any other, in D&D's case, race. When we were looking at designing the species for this game, one of the things we looked at, and personally, like, why I think more people play humans in other games is humans is the species that you play if you want to be able to do anything. Like, again, if we look at D&D or Pathfinder as an example, they're the most versatile, which, is fine, nothing wrong with that. But the problem to me personally, to Jim as a player, was, okay, if I want to have, because I don't really care, as a player, I don't really care about the mechanics one way or another. If say I'm playing a game like D&D, that doesn't influence my decision as far as what I'm going to play, but what stories I can play. And as a human, I have the ability to have any story I want, and there's societies and their build up and there's political drama, and I can do all of that wonderful fun. And then all of the other species feel like, oh, these are humans, but they live a long time, so you have to think about XYZ. Oh, these are humans, but they dig in the dirt, so you have to think about XYZ. And that never felt very exciting to me. It's like, yes, I play humans often, and it's because of the vast array of stories that I could have. So what we ended up doing, and essentially making the design decision, is, okay, what if we get rid of that sort of intro point, and more specifically, why don't we get rid of the species that's like, oh, this is the species where it can be anything and you can be anything, and instead encourage people to look at the species, look at their lore. There is so much depth of lore and plot hooks and things you can do with each of the 8 species that are going to be available. The playtest only has, I think, 5 of them that's out right now, but 8 that are in the game, that every one of these has its own place in the universe, so to speak. And I think that's unique among at least games that I've experienced, and something that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's something, I had to be sold a little bit on, because I was kind of like, I don't know. And I love that we did it. It was such a good decision. And I think it's helped the universe come to life too, because you really do see it through these alien eyes, but then it helps you relate to every alien, because every alien can be something different. The same way you get the spectrum of diversity in humanity, you get the spectrum of diversity among all of our species in attitudes and emotions and everything. It's just it created a very rich universe, I think, that decision.
Yeah, and I think it asks you to take those human experiences and put them into these species, right? There's nowhere else for you to say these human, these more genuine, these very real experiences. They kind of, you're invited to put them into things that you would see as other. So they're still going to be played at the table, just in, you get to have that whole breadth of human experience in a beautiful tentacle being. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of beautiful experiences, let's talk a little bit about the core mechanic. Jim, take it away.
I'm not excited about the mechanics or anything, James. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, so the core mechanic of this game, I'm gonna say I could not be more excited about. It is very much its own unique thing. It's not a system that we've seen before, and it's something we spent a lot of time building this thing up. Actually, one of the things I was thinking about the other day is how different this is from the original mechanical pitch, like what we started, which is what we do as a design team. We play around with stuff and figure out what works well and what doesn't work well. And the end result of this process on Bryte was we created a system that I feel puts so much control and influence over the game in the player's hands, and yet still has a lot of depth and strategy to how it's played out. So with that sales pitch up front for the mechanics, here's kind of how the system works. The core concept of the system is every single player character has the same 18 skills. And these skills, essentially, anytime you make a roll in the system, I think every time there might be one or two that are outside of this, but just about every roll you ever make in the system is going to be a skill roll using one of these 18 skills. And they're broken down into 6 physical, 6 mental, and 6 social skills. Each of these skills is rated on a dice from a D4 to a D12, standard stuff like you would get, D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. And what you will do is you will roll a number of these dice with the objective being to not get doubles. Because our concept is that our player characters are all competent beings that are capable of doing whatever they're trying to do. If I'm trying to take a gun turret and shoot it at an enemy spaceship, I'm capable of doing that. And the only reason I'm going to fail or miss or whatever is if essentially circumstances conflate against me. In the dice, that's represented as matching dice. Okay? So I say I grab 6d4 as my dice pool, I roll them, and again, if none of them come up doubles, then I succeed. So that's our first level of the mechanic. And then what we have is we have this escalating dice pool system. So if you're in a combat encounter, your first action during your turn, you roll 2 dice of whatever skill that you want to use. So if I'm using a D10 skill for my first action, I roll 2 D10s. If I'm using a D4 skill, I roll 2 D4. As long as I don't get doubles, I succeed. If I succeed at my action, I can then take another action, and this time I roll 3 dice, and the next die, 4 dice, and so on up the chain. So now what we have is we have a pressure luck mechanic built into the game of how many actions do you as a player want to take? How many do you risk taking? Because the more actions you take, the higher the probability of failure happens. Failure not only results in you not completing the action, but also results into further bad thing for essentially for the team in the combat encounter. The GM gets what we call collapse points, which is if you fail, they get collapse points, which they can spend to give the bad guys extra turns or activate special abilities or various different things. So now you have a system where you want to press as far as you can, but how far do you go and how far do you risk? How much do you try and accomplish on your turn to weight against the penalty of failure? So that's at the most basic level, the core of the system.
Yeah, I really like you had the shape of this kind of mechanic from the time that you started talking to me about joining the team, right? Was the default assumption of success accept? When was that the concept that really got you excited about it in the first place, or how did this little nugget of core mechanicdom get into your up in your brain space?
All right, so now we're talking now we're talking straight designer to
history.
Industry stuff.
Yeah, when did you go I want to do gambling?
All right, yeah, this is straight designer talk here. I'm going to call it the justification, the conflating circumstances to result in you fail came after the mechanics developed. The mechanic originally came about of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if dice matched that you failed? That's how it actually started, and then to explain in-universe why comes after. So that's the bare bones, nuts and bolts of that. The pressure luck mechanic, I love the design space of giving players control of action economy. Action economy in traditional role-playing games, most designers don't want to touch it because they're used to the standard D&D Pathfinder, which again, there's nothing wrong with it, but players essentially have, I'm going to say, one action. Yeah, they've got minor actions and move and things like that, but they get to do one big thing for turn, and almost any designer worth his salt will tell you, don't ever give players a second action because that's the most powerful possible thing that you can give them is essentially that second action, or at least put it under huge gates. And that's true in a system where you only have one action, but giving the players the agency to not just, here are the pluses and minuses I have on my character sheet, I get to roll 1 die and add to it. I think there's so much more interesting things that we can do with it. And so we started kind of looking at it thematically, and thematically it was, okay, we want players to be, a scrappy group that gets together and gets a spaceship and goes out and does mission things. They're kind of fighting the universe itself to a degree. It's how do we want scrappy people to deal with these type situations? And it's you're pressing your luck against the universe. It's how much can you do before you really get yourselves in trouble? Well, how can we emulate that within the mechanic? And then that's sort of how that built out from there.
Knowing Jim and knowing that he's been wanting to make games since he was a little boy, I figured that he came at it from an approach from gambling stuff way earlier in the process than he did, which is really cool. And that it came from a place of wanting to give the players agency. So good on you, Jim. I think it's a really neat place where it wound up. I also think it's like really, I love how we built it together. James came in with a skill list and he was like, I think this is right. And then we all sat there and hammered away at the skills until we felt good about them.
Yeah, and I mean, even as we're talking about it, I mean, obviously the system that we finished, and you all like to direct these questions at me because you know I'm super energetic about, especially the mechanics in regards. But you know, these are things that we all developed together as a team. You know, and all of this stuff sort of came to life and changed, and like kind of I mentioned, the original plans for it weren't nearly as obviously as formulated as this, and there were significant changes along the way, as any design project has. Just a little thing that you said there about the gambling industry, which is so fascinating to me, because Jim McClure actually doesn't like gamble. It's not something that's interesting to me, but I read so much about the gambling industry because here's the interesting thing from a game designer standpoint is they have done more research into how numbers and odds influence players than anyone else. And that's because obviously they have billions and billions and billions of dollars at stake for this thing.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like, I didn't figure you gambled. I was just like, game theory is well made. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of the areas I wish more designers would take a look at, because they have, I mean, the simple, easy anecdote I like to tell everyone is, which kind of goes counterintuitive what a lot of people think, is the gambling industry did a big study on how people perceive odds when you don't actually know the odds. So think a slot machine. You pull a slot machine, what are the odds of winning? You don't really have any way to actually know or tell that. So how do you perceive the odds? And after they did a big study on this, what they found is that when people are given a 70% success rate, they perceive it as a 50% success rate. So much, much lower. And people kind of want a challenging thing to be a 50-50 success rate. So really, if you actually make a 50-50 success rate for something, you're actually very punishing to the players because they perceive that as much lower. So that's my one little anecdote that we learned from the gambling industry and what they developed. But there's a little bit more to it that kind of ties everything together, which is what we call sort of our Nova Point cycle. And James, you have been quiet on your own podcast, so I'm going to make you talk. So why don't you talk about the Nova Point cycle and how that works?
Sure. And I think this ties directly into what you were talking about, because the big thing when you're thinking about a skill system where you get multiple actions until you fail is, I'm going to use all of my best skills so that I have a much smaller chance of failing, and I will never touch these skills that I am not as good with. And so the Nova Point cycle is meant to get people to want to interact with the game and use skills that they aren't necessarily as good with. So when you use one skill of each die size, right? You use a D4 skill, a D6 skill, a D8 skill, whether or not you succeed with it, you check it off on your character sheet. And when you've checked off one skill of every single die size, you generate a Nova Point. And then you uncheck all the boxes on your character sheet and you can keep generating Nova Points that way. Nova Points are then used, you can spend them to do something very powerful. All characters have specific abilities that they can use that are tied to their species or to a story path that they've completed, which we'll get into in a second. Essentially, these are big, powerful things. For instance, we have a species called the Rornan, which is a colony of insects that shares a hive mind. So you play one of these hives and you can split when you spend a Nova Point, and then you have multiple tokens running around on the Roll20 board. You can do really powerful things like heal somebody or make a group of people that you are talking to influence them to do something for you, kind of like controlling a mob. So there's a lot of fun things you can do specifically with them, or you can use them, anyone can use them to edit a scene. Any player can use them to sort of add big details details to a scene that are not something we necessarily think of as the player's purview, even in like a cooperative storytelling game. So those are Nova points, and they're real awesome. And that's why people are going to want to dip into those D4 and D6 skills because they're going to want to get those Nova points. Also because failing is fun and makes for an interesting story. And speaking of stories, I think character advancement is really, really cool. And that I'm going to throw to Kat.
I love a lot of what we've done mechanically, but I think my favorite thing is story paths. We don't have a class system. We just have species in order to get more like species powers and different types of exciting things. The way that folks level is by selecting stories that you want to progress down that are like not fully prescriptive, but like loosely prescriptive things. And you check in at the end of each of your play sessions to see how far along you get. And each step of the way grants you types of advancement opportunities along your species paths, either in like basic abilities or Nova point abilities. And that's the general gist of it. So to give you a specific example, the sort of story paths that you're looking at are like have a rival. So like the sorts of things that you are like, oh, this guy really burns me up. And that's like you'd pick somebody out in the world and you just like Elphaba and Glinda, they just like, they just can't stand each other. And so you have a direct impact on the types of stories you and your GM are telling. And it has like a rough outline of how this story with you and your rival play out. You guys will have a competition of some variety. They'll up the stakes, and you wind through what it's like to have a rivalry. And there's some climactic conclusion to that story that grants you some sort of cool, exciting bonus. And what I like about this is that it is non-violent progression. There are plenty of opportunities for violence, of course, out in the world because, hey, we are playing a thing that is D&D aligned. But you don't have to. You can do a lot of stories that aren't like that, and you can do a completely pacifistic run. That's, I think, neat because we often say, hey, RPGs don't have to be violent, but then we only give you the tools for violence. And this, we didn't want to do that, and then we found a way to not do that.
Yeah, what makes me happiest about it, and what was kind of a design principle from the beginning, was designing for the types of players we knew existed and the type of play experiences we knew people could have, but were not easy to have in games we've played before. So largely nonviolent games. How do you have a game where someone is being a blacksmith and someone is trying to be the best soldier around or whatever, really hardcore warrior, how do you have those in the same ship? How do you have them being rewarded equally for like good play at the table? Like how can you, and when we thought about classes, right? I'm always that kind of player that wants to like, if you give me a box, I'm going to try to origami it into something else, right? I'm always that jerk that is trying to see, okay, so I see this box, what could I do that's unusual with it? And so I think the removal of the canalization of classes and leading it instead into this very piecemeal, choose your own adventure, follow the story paths that make you happy, that appeals to me a lot. I just think it lets the player be a lot more in charge of the curated experience that they want to have at the table without feeling like they're going to be bringing I think sometimes there's if you're not playing your character optimally, you're going to screw over your pals at the table. And this is a game where you can have your personal play experience and you're going to be getting better at stuff in a way that will help you and the team. So I think it really removes some of that pressure in a way that I think will be very freeing for some kinds of players.
Yeah, and I think from the perspective, too, of the GM, the hope is that we relieve some of the pressure for the GM, too, right? That they can look at the players' story paths and say, oh, this is the kind of story that the players want to experience. And, oh, these are the things that, these are the choices they'll need to make along this path that they want to make. So I will go ahead and lay that out. So it should make your prep, but also like getting inside of your players' heads a little bit easier too, which I think that's always a great thing is when you can have that sort of direct connection going on between players and GMs through the mechanics is always really exciting for me.
Yeah, I also love that it bakes in a debrief, right? That it gives the players and the GM at the end of each session a good check-in that doesn't feel like the DM forcing maintenance work, that everybody like has to check in with each other as a part of the mechanics. And it's like a good positive thing instead of everyone like having to do this project managerial thing that only one person wants to do.
Don't go anywhere. There's more Tabletop Babble coming up.
Hey there, listeners. It's Shane.
And Ishan, your hosts from the Total Party Thrill podcast, the newest addition to the Don't Split the Podcast network.
We talk topics that help you, dear listener, create and play better RPG games.
We have a back catalog of more than 150 weekly episodes.
And we got nominated for an Emmy for episode 11, Social Contracts.
In episode 154, we talked about crossing the moral event horizon. How evil is too evil?
We also recap our home games, like the 40k Rogue Trader campaign, Dynasty Unwarranted.
But that's mainly just you trying to kill us all. In your defense, our characters are greedy idiots.
Don't forget the 3 years we spent in Eberron playing Morning Glory, your 5th edition D&D campaign.
We also review new RPGs and books, and every episode we build a 5th edition D&D character in the Character Creation Forge.
You might check out the Pint-Sized Punisher from episode 119, a halfling with a bad attitude, and 14 levels of Barbarian.
So to recap, Total Party Thrill, RPG advice, campaign recaps, and D&D characters built by your dashing hosts every single week.
What more could you possibly want?
To get back to the actual show?
Oh yeah, let me just hit this button, and here you go.
All right, back to the show. Looking at story paths and looking at some of the unique things that are being done from that bookkeeping perspective of like, this is going to be a fun way for you to track what your character is doing, what they want to do, where they're going to go. We also have a group character sheet, which is the ship's character sheet, right? In a lot of sci-fi, right? You've got the ship. It's the place where you live, the place where you hang out. It's your home, right? The Millennium Falcon or Serenity.
Name another ship. Okay.
Do it.
And those are almost characters in those narratives themselves. And so we wanted to take that a little bit further and have a ship not only that is a character and has a character sheet, but the players can get together and customize with these modules. And it uses Roll20 really great because you can click and drag things and drop them onto the ship and say like, look, we have a new lounge. Here it is. I'm dropping the lounge tile into the ship and yay, it's awesome. But I think one of the really cool things is the magical intelligence. Kat, you want to talk about ships being alive?
Sure. Though I feel like Darcy should take it because didn't you make this like we were all sleep deprived at Metatopia last year. And we were like, okay, we need to figure out ships. And I think Darcy was like, what if they were alive? I want to kiss the ship. I think that's what happened. Am I wrong?
I mean, that's a pretty accurate transcription of what went down. And then I really liked, ships being alive, fantastic. We're in a weird science fantasy world. Machine intelligences is always kind of, the combination of organic and inorganic is great. But what I really love of how it came together is this fact that it gets a character sheet. We acknowledge the role that having a ship plays in a lot of stories many people want to tell, right? But it puts front and center, your shared group resources too. So I think like visually, especially someone had asked, I believe it was Jeff Stormer from Party of One Pod had asked us to talk about some of the ways that this game takes advantage of the virtual tabletop experience. And I think this is one of them, right? Just like James was saying, you get to drag these modules onto the ship, and that affects how your resources your team has. Like if you have a lounge, right, that's going to give you different things than if you've packed your ship full of weapons, right? There are so many ways we're catering to the personal experience with these story paths, really letting people get into their character. But you are a group, right? There's something that brought you together. That is why you are working together on the edge of the time of the universe, right? What are you building together? What are you bringing together? I just really think visually, for me as a player, when I have a good visual, that grounds me, that affects me. I love art and show-ems in games, right? And I think having that ship character sheet be so present reminds you that ship intelligence, that character, that person potentially is going to be in your life, and you can go interact with it. So it reminds you to engage with that if you want to. If you're not like me and constantly want to kiss any ship you come in contact with, then maybe you need a reminder. But also it reinforces we're a group together. What are we building together? And I think that as much as this is a world that's at odds, you at least have come together with some other people and are forming bonds, and perhaps sacrificing your personal goals for helping the group on occasion. And so I think just thematically, that makes me very happy.
All I can remember from that Metatopia, again, was it last year, 2 years ago, however long it's been, is I got as good as I couldn't tell you which of the two of you had came up with the idea for ships. I just remember looking at Kat and Squee and going, the ships can fall in love. And that is literally the only thing I remember.
Yeah, you did that. And then also you were like, the ships can poison each other.
Yes, and I don't know why I only think of love and poison, but apparently there's a slice of my brain.
You were the one who was like, the ships can poison each other. And then you also made gravity wells for the ships. And I was just like, holy moly, no one is going to believe that Jim is the person who made the ships poison each other and do gravity wells, and I am the person who made Gundams. No one's going to believe this.
Yes. Listen, there is, all right, we got this far and without mentioning Gundam Wing, okay? So here we go. Yes, I have gotten accused from so many people. One of the playable species are called the Peacecraft, and essentially they're mechs. They're pilotable mechs, and they're named Peacecraft, which is a name from Gundam Wing, an anime that I personally think is the greatest story mankind has ever told. I'm a big fan of Gundam Wing, as all of you should be as well. And so Kat gets this devious idea to name this species the Peacecrafts. I think at this point as a joke, because I'm not even kidding you, no less than 20 people at this stage, while it's still in pre-test, have gone, I see you put Gundam in the game, and I have to go, no, I didn't. That wasn't me. You can't blame me for that. That is 100% Kat's nonsense.
It's not nonsense.
And I appreciate all of that.
It's not nonsense. It's a good name for them. They're crafts that do peace. They're from the planet Pax, and Pax is also a Transformers name. I feel it is a very appropriate name. I just like them a lot.
It is the perfect name, yes.
Yeah, it's a good name. I'm very sorry that you're getting put on blast like this constantly.
I accept nothing other than it was intentional, Kat. I know it was intentional.
Speaking as a person who doesn't know Gundam Wing and very much enjoys Trolls of Jim McClure, I thought it was great. I actually didn't know until months and months later that there was some Gundam Wing referencing happening with that name or anything like that. And it's super appropriate and leads me into what I think will likely be one of our last questions here. I'd love everybody to just talk about one of their favorite species. I got to talk about the Ronin earlier, which I love and I think are awesome. As my wife says, I love swarms of things. So I guess that's why the Ronin made it into the game. But Kat, do you have a favorite species we haven't touched on yet?
I guess other than the Peacecraft, whom I really love a lot, I really love that I got to make the Eno. The Eno have like so much of my cultural heritage in them. I'm Ecuadorian, and there's just a lot of my family's baggage up in the Eno. I don't know. The Eno are the Estrella family, from like games that my family used to play when I was a kid, through just like the way that we behave to my grandmother's nonsense. It's all up in there, hidden amidst what look like a bunch of cat people. So I'm honored to get to put them in there and through like the monsters in their region and stuff. So it's exciting to me that people, I saw that some people were playing them and I was just like, holy moly, people are doing it. Like they're doing it without me forcing it on them. Holy smokes. It was very exciting.
Yeah, they're incredible. And again, a super rich species. To hear you say that there's a lot of your family in them, you must have had a very interesting experience growing up.
I did, James. Yeah. Yeah. The Australia family it's fairly complex. We are the bastard offshoot of a prominent political family. So, yeah, it's... Yeah.
Well, I'm getting a great idea for a campaign. So
we should collab on that. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Darcy, what about you? Do you have a favorite species?
I'll talk about one. I feel like assigning favorites is something I'm not willing to do here. Buy me a drink in a bar, and then maybe I'll divulge my favorites. I wanted to talk about driftlings a little bit. The species driftlings kind of comes from a question that got me into grad school, or into my PhD program. It was this hypothetical question of when things evolve, there's often adaptation to an environment, right? If you are a fish and all the water sort of evaporating out, the ones that can't sort of deal with getting dried out a little bit might die in a certain area. And then the ones that are better at dealing with, oh my gosh, it's muddy and I'm on land suddenly for a few hours, those tend to survive. And so you get this offshoot that is getting better at something, adapting to an environment. But there are some species that during its own life can really adapt to certain things, right? So if you think about animal plasticity, right? So within a single organism, if Darcy was able to, if you chucked me out into space and suddenly I could rearrange my body so that I can have bigger cell walls that, prevent me from bursting from the pressure, right? If I could adapt during my own life, would that mean you would never evolve because you could perfectly adapt so nothing would ever have to change? Or would you... So there was this interesting question about a perfectly plastic organism, something that would constantly change to be better adapted to its environment. And so I wanted to think about a species that would do that and what that would mean, right? So the driftlings are plastic organisms that don't have a default state, a default form. And so as they spend time around other species, they start to take on the shape, various or some of the anatomy or some of the features of the creatures they're around. I think about this sometimes like how people tend to pick up accents if they're accidentally picking up the accent of the people around them, right? We already do a little bit of that plasticity, but what if you could do it in a larger way? And I really adore them because they, this is really creepy for other species, right? Technically, this is the Cylon problem, right? You have something that could look perfectly like you, and you wouldn't know that it's secretly this whole other organism. That can be really scary for people, right? So driftlings have this sort of fear surrounding them, but they're actually really eager to learn about other forms, and it's considered in their society sort of a good thing to go experience many different kinds of organisms and learn what it's like to be someone else or to have the form of someone else. Yeah, so I think they're just fascinating. I definitely want to put in a campaign of mine some questions of like, do I put some rogue driftlings in, driftlings that are sort of masquerading as some of the other species? Is there never any driftlings that are masquerading as other species, but it's an excuse to sort of come in and take over a planet of driftlings? Is that an excuse that we use to war against each other? So they just make me really curious and interested. So I'm very, very excited to play more with the driftlings.
That's like a whole game in and of itself that I want to play.
Throw him out the airlock. He's a driftling.
Jim, do you have a favorite species?
Obviously, if you can't tell from the last 55 minutes or however long we've been on here, that I have no problem making outrageous proclamations of what's the best. So my favorite species is going to be the Kuthuk. The Kuthuk they're just adorable little bug. I shouldn't say little. They're adorable giant bug humanoid species. Essentially, they look like kind of like a human and a beetle kind of came together and made a thing, except they're like, a good 8.5 feet tall.
Like a bugbear.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because I wanted bug, but not so like sharp and edgy. Like let's have a cuddly giant bug, and like a bugbear. How have we made it this far in the process, and that's the first time that joke's come out? All right, there we go. Well, now we have to change it. But they're a really interesting species. They're very martial species. They're kind of, a fighter type class would kind of be one of the things that they do. But it's the society around them that really fascinates me, in that their home planet, essentially, they live in these giant biomasses. So kind of some of the inspiration for this was kind of like how crabs live up sort of towards the Arctic and Alaska area and all that, which is the way they kind of stay warm is they huddle together in these giant biomasses to conserve what heat that they do have. So we essentially created a very similar thing for them, and that's where they came from, except their world was one of the early worlds that was destroyed by the burn. So now they've been displaced. And the problem is they're a super friendly species. So like you if there's one Kithuk, you're like, oh, yay, here's a friendly protector for our little outpost or village, and they get along great and everyone loves them. But as a group, they consume a tremendous amount of resources. So they're a problem on a galactic scale, because when a new colony of Kithuk have to be put someplace, it's who has the resources to actually support it. We like you all as individuals, but as a group, you're a major problem to the livability of other species, which puts them really in this interesting place where it's we like one of you, but we don't like four of you. And how to deal with that and the role play opportunities that have are what make me really like the Kithuk.
Yeah, they're really cool. I love them all so much, and I certainly understand not wanting to necessarily pick a favorite, because it is like trying to pick a favorite child, which we all know our parents have, but they just won't tell us who it is.
No, my parents explicitly tell me that I'm not in the running for that, so I don't know how you all's families work, but coming from the closed off Irish family that we are, we talk about nothing until someone asks a direct question, and then you get a direct answer.
Sure. Well, none of you are favorite children, then, I assume. Are you a middle child, Jim? Well, we can get into that later.
Definitely youngest. No, I have youngest kid syndrome all over me.
So, as we're wrapping up here, let's just go around the table. Let me know where people can find you. Jim, let's start with you. Where can people find you?
Oh, goodness gracious. The best way to directly interact with me is on Twitter. I am at GM Jim McClure, because I made a Twitter handle when I thought I was only going to run games online. Ha ha ha, joke's on me. But yeah, it's GM as in a game master, Jim McClure, MCCLURE. So that's the most active place if you want to directly interact with me. If you want to see what all of the exciting projects that I do, you can go on over to the Third Act Publishing website. That's thirdactpub.com. And that's my website where it has all of my projects up. It's a store. You can, if you like them, you can buy them, of course. There's free products up there, and you can go over there and explore all of the wonderful goodness that Third Act is doing.
Awesome. Kat, where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter, where my username is @cat_Kuhl_ with Kuhl spelled like my last name, Kuhl. And if you want to find out what I'm doing, you can head over to autonomicpodcast.com with autonomic spelled like the nervous system.
That is a great way to do it. And Darcy, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram and all the places at Darcy L. Ross. I tweet a lot about RPGs and weird critters, and so you can definitely find lots of great scientists who I retweet a lot, studying beautiful, terrifying jellies and fish and nudibranchs and things. So come for the RPGs and stay for the weird invertebrates, or vice versa.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. That was awesome. Seriously, if you are interested in Bryte, you can check it out right now if you are a Roll20 Pro or Plus subscriber in the playtest version, which is not the full version of the game, but does include an adventure for you to get started, pre-gens, and a whole slew of rules to check out. And we need your feedback. So if you're a Roll20 Pro or Plus subscriber, get a group together, play it, and fill out our quick survey. It will be super duper helpful. And also don't forget to check out the Bryte live stream every Monday at noon Pacific on Roll20's Twitch channel. That's twitch.tv/Roll20app. People, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso, JamesIntrocaso, and over at worldbuilderblog.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. It's okay if somebody doesn't want to play. Hey everybody, just a reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Genuine Fantasy Press. If you go to genuinefantasypress.com, you can get 125 pages of new 5th edition D&D player content. It's the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening. It is an awesome supplement by William Hudson King that will bring Eldritch forces into your role-playing game. You can drop it in anywhere, and you should really check it out. There's all kinds of awesome options, particularly for warlocks. 17 new warlock Pact of the Chain familiars, and so much more. If you head over there, you can check out the free player version, and you can pre-order the beautiful hardcover version. The art is incredible for this thing. The cover is one of the greatest I've ever seen, and it's not just warlock options. There's the Divine Domain of Fate for clerics, which is pretty awesome. There are going to be new hooks for game masters to use, and all sorts of new subclass options for other classes. So go check it out at genuinefantasypress.com and tell them DSPN sent you.